She left me and said, "You'll never move on without me in your life." I stayed silent and focused on myself. Months later, she saw me happier than ever, and that's when she tried to come back. "You'll never move on without me in your life." She said it like a fact she'd already confirmed. Not a warning, not even anger, just certainty. The kind that belongs to someone who has already decided how your story ends, and they just wanted you to know they knew. I didn't say anything back, not because I had nothing to say, but because some quiet, exhausted part of me was terrified she was right. She picked up her bag from the kitchen floor, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and walked out of the apartment we'd shared for a year and a half. She didn't slam the door. She didn't look back. She just left, the way someone leaves a place they're certain they can return to whenever they want. And I stood there in the silence she'd made, looking at the empty space where her coat used to hang, looking at the chair she always sat in when she was on the phone, looking at the door she'd just walked out of. And I thought, quietly, in the part of myself I didn't want to examine too closely, she might actually be right. What I didn't know, in that moment, was that those 5 words were about to become the most useful thing she ever gave me. Not the relationship, not the memories. Those 5 words. Because they made me so angry, slowly, quietly, over weeks, that I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I figured out who I was without her. And I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed absolutely everything. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. We had been together for 3 years and 4 months. I was 27 when it ended. She was 26. Her name was Claire. And for most of those 3 years, she was everything. I need to tell you how it started falling apart before I tell you how it ended. Because if I just skip to the breakup, you'll think it was dramatic. You'll think there was a big blow-up, a betrayal, a single terrible moment. But it wasn't like that. It was slow. The way a room gets cold, not all at once, but degree by degree, until you look up one day and realize you've been shivering for months without naming it. The arguments started in year 2. Small things. Ordinary couple friction. I forgot to call when I said I would. I made plans with a friend without checking with her first. I stayed too long at a work event. None of these things were unusual. None of them were intentional. But the reaction to them, that was where I should have paid more attention. Because it was never proportional. A missed call became evidence that I didn't prioritize her. A forgotten plan became proof that I didn't respect her time. A work event became a referendum on whether she actually mattered to me at all. And every single time, I found myself apologizing. Not because I thought I'd done something truly wrong, but because the apology was the only thing that ended it. Apologizing was the off switch. So I used it, and I kept using it. And somewhere in that repetition, I stopped knowing where my genuine accountability ended and my habit of just quieting the storm began. I remember a specific night. It was a Thursday, late November. We'd been together almost 2 years at that point. I had a friend, a guy I'd known since university, visiting from out of town for one night only. I told Claire about it weeks in advance. She'd said it was fine. But the day of, she went quiet. Not angry quiet. Just withdrawn. That particular silence that meant something was building. I asked her what was wrong. She said, "Nothing." I asked again. She said, "I just thought we'd have dinner tonight. I made something." I looked at the stove. She had made something. She hadn't mentioned she was going to do that. I felt the familiar pull. The urge to cancel. To stay. To choose her. And then I felt something else. Quieter. Newer. That said, I told her about this weeks ago. I went. I had dinner with my friend. I was back by 10. And Claire was in bed. Lights off. Facing the wall. I said goodnight. She didn't respond. In the morning she was fine. We never talked about it. But I started doing the calculation in my head after that. Every time I had something that was mine, a plan, a commitment, a simple want, I'd weigh it against the cost of pursuing it. And more often, the cost didn't feel worth it. So I started shrinking, canceling things before she could object, checking in before I committed to anything, reshaping my life around the edges of hers. And the painful, embarrassing truth is, I thought I was being a good partner. I genuinely thought that was what love looked like. Sacrifice, constant adjustment, the willingness to make yourself smaller so the other person feels like enough. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. The engagement party incident happened about 4 months before the end. We were at her friend Cassidy's engagement party, a rooftop thing, warm evening, good food. I fell into conversation near the bar with a guy named Owen. We'd been introduced once before through work connections, but never really talked. Turns out we had a lot in common. We were deep into a conversation about something. I can't even remember what now, when I felt Claire's hand slip into mine. Firmly, she pulled me, almost imperceptibly, away from him. I glanced back at Owen mid-sentence, laughed it off, told him I'd catch him later. Claire walked us toward her friend group. I went with her. I didn't say anything. Later that night, lying in bed, she said it. You were more relaxed in that conversation than I've seen you in months. I wasn't sure if she was upset or just observing. I said he's easy to talk to. She said, you seem different around people who don't know you well. Lighter. There was something underneath that sentence. I could feel it pressing up through the words. And I made the mistake of answering it honestly. I said, maybe because there's less at stake. She went quiet. And then, after a long moment, what does that mean? I tried to walk it back. I said I was just tired. I said it didn't mean anything. I apologized for the phrasing. But that sentence hung in the air between us from that night forward. Because we both knew what it meant. It meant I had stopped being myself around her, because being myself around her had started to feel unsafe. It meant that the person who laughed easily, talked openly, filled up space naturally, that person had gotten very quiet inside our relationship, very carefully, over a very long time. She knew it. I knew it. And neither of us said it clearly until much later. The 6 weeks before the breakup were some of the heaviest of my life. We tried. I'll give us that. We both tried. I planned a weekend away, a coastal town about 2 hours out, a place she'd mentioned wanting to visit years ago. It started beautifully. First evening. Dinner, walking along the waterfront, that easy warmth between two people who have known each other long enough to stop needing to fill every silence. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what we needed. A reset. And then, on the second morning, I made an offhand comment. I can't even remember what it was. Something about the drive back. Something about taking a different route to see a particular stretch of coast I'd read about. And she got quiet. Not right away, but by afternoon, the quiet had thickened into something else. By evening, we were at dinner, and she said she felt like I was making the trip about what I wanted. I looked at her across the table. I looked at her for a long time, and I felt something shift. Not snap, not break, just shift, like a weight that had been balanced on an edge finally, quietly, tilting. I said, very calmly, I planned this whole trip for you. The town you wanted to see, the restaurant you picked, the hotel you chose. I suggested one route on the drive home, and somehow that's about me. She said, it's the way you said it. How did I say it? Like you'd already decided. I asked if you were okay with it. You didn't ask. You said, we should take the coastal road back. I closed my menu, set it on the table, looked at the window, breathed. And then, quietly, I said, I don't know how to get this right. She didn't say anything. I don't know what the correct version of me looks like in this relationship anymore. I said, I'm not asking you to be a different version of yourself. Then what are you asking? She looked at me, and her eyes were genuinely sad. Not angry. Sad. I just want to feel like I matter, she said. And my heart broke a little. Because I wanted to say, you do. I wanted to say, you have mattered so much that I have made myself disappear around the edges of mattering to you. But I didn't say that. I said, you matter. And she nodded. And we finished dinner. And we drove home on the regular road. And 3 weeks later, she told me she thought we were done. The final morning was a Saturday. Quiet. Gray sky through the bedroom window. I was already up, making coffee, when she came into the kitchen. She was wearing the old sweater she always wore on slow mornings. She sat at the table without saying anything. I poured 2 cups, set one in front of her, sat across from her, and we both just held our coffee for a moment. Like we already knew. She said, I think we both know this isn't working. Yeah, I said. One word. Carrying everything. She said, I'll start looking for a place this week. I'll need about a month. Take whatever you need. She nodded. And then the silence settled again. That particular kind of silence between two people who have said almost everything to each other over 3 years and have nothing left to add. She looked at her cup. She looked at the table. She looked at me. And something crossed her expression that I couldn't read immediately. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't grief. It was harder than that. Almost like resolve. And she said it. Quietly. Completely evenly. You'll never move on without me in your life. I looked at her. She held my gaze. No flinching. No hesitation. Like she'd said something so obvious it barely needed saying. And then she picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, stood, and walked back down the hallway to the bedroom. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. Coffee going cold. Light shifting through the window. And I turned those words over and over in my mind. Not with anger yet. Just wait. You'll never move on without me in your life. Part of me wanted to knock on that bedroom door and argue. Prove her wrong immediately, out of reflex. But the other part, the quieter, more honest part, just sat with how much I was afraid she was right. Because I had made my entire world so small. Because she had been at the center of it for so long. Because I genuinely wasn't sure, in that moment, who I was apart from the version of me that existed inside our relationship. I sat there until the coffee was cold, and then I poured it down the sink, and I went back to the window, and I stared at nothing for a while. And somewhere in that nothing, something very small and very quiet said, "Prove her wrong." She moved out 4 weeks later. The last thing she brought down was a small succulent we'd bought at a weekend market in year one. I watched from the window. She paused by the car, looked up. Our eyes met for exactly 1 second, and then she drove away. I stood at that window long after the car was gone. The apartment felt like something that had been emptied too fast. Every room had a Claire-shaped absence in it. Her side of the closet, the bathroom shelf where her things used to be, the corner of the couch, the hook near the door where her coat always hung. I walked through the rooms that first evening, not looking for anything, just letting it be as bad as it was. Because I'd read once, or heard it somewhere I can't remember, that grief doesn't respond to logic or speed. It doesn't move faster because you want it to. You don't heal by avoiding the feeling. You heal by moving through it, on its own timeline, and coming out the other side changed. So I sat in it. I ordered pizza I barely tasted. I watched television I can't recall. I stared at ceilings. And around midnight, I found a notebook I hadn't opened in almost 2 years, a nice one, leather-covered, bought when I'd had some ambitions about journaling regularly and then abandoned, and I opened it and started writing. Not about her. Not about the relationship. Not about the breakup. Just things in my head that needed space. Thoughts I'd been carrying without examining. Once I had quietly stopped wanting because they never fit inside what we were. Things I was curious about. Things I missed. Things I was afraid of. Things I thought I might be capable of if I let myself try. I wrote for 2 hours. And when I put the pen down and looked at what I'd written, I felt something shift. Not healed. Not better. But emptied out in a way that felt like preparation. Like space being made. For something. I didn't know what yet. But something. 2 weeks after she left, her text arrived. "Hey, how are you doing?" Short. Casual. Like checking in on someone you thought about occasionally. I stared at that message for longer than I want to admit. Because the version of me from 3 months earlier would have responded within seconds. Would have been flooded with something. Hope, maybe, or just relief at contact. Would have started constructing meaning out of 5 words. But I had been doing a lot of thinking in those 2 weeks. A lot of very quiet, very uncomfortable thinking. And I was starting to understand something about that message. It wasn't concern. It was a check. She was checking to see if I was still where she'd left me. Still untethered. Still needing her. Still available to confirm the things she'd said in the kitchen. I put my phone face down. And I went for a run. My first run in probably 2 years. I made it a mile before everything in my body staged a coordinated protest. I walked the rest. Came home breathing hard. Felt, despite the burning in my legs, marginally more like a person than I had that morning. I went again the next day. And the day after that. 4 days after her text, I responded. 3 words. "Doing all right. Thanks." She didn't reply. And that silence confirmed everything I'd suspected about the message. It had never been about how I was doing. It had been about whether I was still the person who couldn't do without her. Here's the part of the story I held back until now. The part that, once you hear it, makes everything else look different. About 8 months into our relationship, still early, still electric, before we moved in together, I went through the worst professional period of my life up to that point. A project I'd been leading for 11 months fell apart almost overnight. The client pulled funding. The team scattered. 2 years of groundwork, gone. I was devastated in a way I hadn't been since I was a kid. Not just professionally embarrassed. Actually devastated. Like something I'd been building toward turned out to be made of sand. And Claire, I have to give her this. Claire was extraordinary during that time. She listened. Really listened. Not the kind of listening where someone is waiting for their turn to speak. The real kind. She'd sit with me in the evenings and just let me process. She'd remind me of specific things I'd done while that I couldn't see anymore from inside the failure. She'd bring food over without being asked. She'd say, "You're not defined by this project." And I believed her. Because I needed to. And I held on to that version of her. Through all of year 2. Through the eggshell mornings and the weighted silences and the arguments that seemed bigger than what started them. I'd go back to that image, Claire, sitting across from me during the worst weeks of my career, steady and warm and genuinely there. And I'd tell myself that was the real her. The rest was just friction. Every couple has friction. But something my therapist said, I started seeing a therapist about 6 weeks after the breakup, for myself this time, not for the relationship. Something she said reframed all of it. She said, it sounds like she was most present, most warm, most available when you were at your lowest. I said yes, that was exactly right. She said, what happened when things started going well for you? I started to answer, and then I stopped, because I was suddenly going through memory after memory. The promotion, 16 months in. She'd congratulated me, and then spent the next 2 weeks making small, careful comments about how I'd probably be working more, how things would be different, how she hoped I wouldn't become one of those people who define themselves entirely by career. Nothing huge, nothing I could point to directly. Just a slow, steady lowering of the temperature around the thing I was excited about. The app I'd started building in my spare time. A small project, nothing serious, just something mine. She'd called it a hobby phase every time she referenced it. Not to be cruel. She genuinely might not have noticed. But she never called it a project. Never asked about it. Never sat with me the way she'd sat with me during the failure. The half marathon I trained for. She'd told her friends about it enthusiastically. And then, the week before the race, a blow-up. One of the worst we'd had. About something I truly cannot remember now. What I remember is running 13.1 miles on about 4 hours of sleep, legs working on emotional fumes, and crossing that finish line without a single person there I could celebrate with. Because I hadn't told anyone. Celebrating felt dangerous by then. Success felt like something I had to absorb quietly, without making it visible, because visibility made it a target. I sat in my therapist's office going through all of this. And she didn't say, she was a bad person. She didn't say, you were a victim. She said, very simply, some people feel most secure when their partner needs them. When the partner becomes capable and confident, it threatens the balance. So they find ways, usually unconsciously, to restore the equilibrium they're comfortable with. I sat with that for a long time. And then I felt it. The anger. Not hot anger. Not the destructive kind. Clean anger. Clear and focused and, as my therapist put it, useful. Anger, when it's clean, is energy, she said. Use it. I did. Month 2 after the breakup. I joined a gym. Not to impress anyone. Not to transform into something. Just because I needed somewhere to put the energy that had started building since the run. I went 3 times the first week. Learned the equipment. Found a trainer who didn't talk too much. Built a routine slowly. Then added to it. Then stopped thinking about it as a choice and started treating it as just what I did. I started cooking instead of ordering in every night. Nothing elaborate. Simple, real food. Something I'd stopped doing because Claire had strong opinions about meals, and it was easier to defer to her preferences than to navigate around them. Turns out I actually liked cooking. That sounds small. It wasn't. Finding out you like something you'd forgotten about yourself, that's not small. I opened the side project back up. The app. The hobby phase. It had been dormant for almost 8 months. I opened the codebase, read through what I'd built, and immediately felt that particular quality of interest, the absorbed, time-dissolving, I forgot to eat kind, that I hadn't felt in a very long time. I started working on it Saturday mornings. Coffee, laptop, silence, no agenda. And I noticed, genuinely noticed, with something close to wonder, that I looked forward to those mornings. Not just the work. The specific quality of being alone with something I cared about, without needing to manage anyone else's relationship to my caring about it. That was new. Or rather, it was old. It was the person I'd been before I'd slowly trained myself out of it. Ben, my coworker, the one who'd knocked on my doorframe 3 weeks after the breakup and said I looked like a haunted man, became a real friend somewhere in month 2. We'd have coffee after work, then dinner sometimes. He introduced me to a group of people he'd known for years. Good people. Easy people. Nobody who needed me to be a certain size to feel comfortable. Nobody who scanned my face for signs of success to cut down. I could walk into those evenings as whatever version of myself existed that day. Energetic, tired, loud, quiet. And it was just fine. It was remarkably, surprisingly, simply fine. I hadn't felt that in years. Not inside the relationship. Inside the relationship, I was always performing a version of myself. The one that wouldn't alarm her. The one that kept the temperature stable. The one that made her feel irreplaceable. With these people, I was just present. And the difference between those two ways of existing in a room was so stark it made the last 3 years ache a little differently. Month 3. Something shifted. I can't name the exact day or point to a specific moment. It was more like one morning I realized I hadn't thought about Claire before noon. And then a few days after that, I realized the familiar weight in my chest, the one I'd carried since the breakup like a stone stitched beneath my sternum, had been absent for most of a day. And then a full week where I only thought about the relationship when I chose to. When I decided to sit with it deliberately. When I invited the examination. Not when it chased me down. There's a difference. Being chased by something means it still has power over you. Choosing to examine something means you have power over it. Month 3 was when I started choosing. I ran a 10K that month. No blow up the week before. No one to manage. Just me and 11 weeks of early mornings and the specific satisfaction of something earned entirely by myself. I crossed the finish line and felt, the only word that fits, clean. Like the inside of something that had been scrubbed and aired out and left in the sun. Month 4. The app got traction. I posted it quietly in a couple of online communities. Not expecting much. Just wanting a few honest eyes on it. The response surprised me. Not viral. Not overnight success. But real people. Real feedback. Real interest. Real energy around something I had built from nothing. In the early mornings and the late nights. In the silence of an apartment that was finally just mine. I started giving it more time. More structure. Started thinking about it as an actual thing. Not a hobby. Not a phase. And I noticed something happening. I was excited. Openly, visibly, unmanaged excited. Excited in the way I hadn't let myself be excited about anything in years because excitement was a vulnerability in the place I'd been living. And nobody around me was finding the caveat. Nobody was quietly lowering the temperature. Ben, when I told him the numbers, said, "That's genuinely impressive. What's next?" Not but anything. Not a qualification. Just, what's next? I laughed. And then I answered him. And the answer came fast and confident and full. Like it had been waiting. Month 5. I was back at the coffee shop on a Tuesday morning when I looked up from my laptop and saw Owen. The guy from the engagement party. He recognized me first. Waved. I went over. We talked for almost an hour and a half. He was working on something interesting. He asked about the app. He'd somehow seen it mentioned somewhere online. We exchanged details. 2 weeks later, he introduced me to someone who became a collaborator. And I stood there, in the middle of all this. New work, new people, new direction, and traced it back. All of it traced back to a conversation Claire had tried to end. At an engagement party. On a warm evening. She'd pulled me away with her hand firmly in mine, and I'd let her. And now I was standing in the middle of everything that conversation had eventually led to. And I thought about that. Not with bitterness. I want to be precise about this. Not bitterness. Because bitterness is just grief that has gone stiff from not being moved. It keeps you facing the wrong direction. This wasn't that. This was clarity. Clean and still. The kind that just shows you the shape of something true. And what was true was this. I had made myself very small. I had done it gradually, quietly, convinced it was love, convinced it was maturity, convinced that the disappearing was just what good partners did. And everything I was building now, every piece of it, existed in the space I had reclaimed. The space I should have been living in all along. Month 6. A rooftop bar. Saturday evening. Ben's friend group. A summer occasion. A view of the city going golden in the late light. I was in the middle of a conversation, laughing at something, when I reached for my drink. And I saw her. Claire. 20 feet away. With 2 of her friends. Already looking at me. Which meant she'd seen me first. Which meant she'd had a moment to compose her face. But she hadn't, quite. Because even from that distance, across a rooftop full of noise and movement and other lives, I could see it. Something moved in her expression the instant our eyes met. Recognition, yes. But underneath that, something else. Something that looked almost like surprise. The kind of surprise that doesn't make sense unless someone came expecting to find a different version of you. A diminished version. A version that confirmed what she'd said in the kitchen. I held her gaze for one steady second. Then I smiled. Not performed, not pointed, just the natural expression of someone who is genuinely okay. And I looked back to my conversation. She came over about 10 minutes later. Hey. That particular silence between people who once said everything. You look good, she said. Thanks. How are you? Good. Yeah, really good. She wasn't. I didn't say that. Her friends had drifted toward the bar. Ben had quietly stepped back. It was just the two of us in a small pocket of air on that rooftop. You seem different, she said. Different how? She looked at me carefully, taking stock, like someone trying to figure out what changed in a room they used to know well. Happy, she said. The word snagged slightly, not quite landing the way she'd intended. I am, I said, genuinely. She nodded. Small nod. Slow. I've been thinking about you, she said. I didn't respond. She continued. I wanted to reach out a few times. I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me. Probably smart, I said. Not cruel. Just honest. She absorbed that. I miss you, she said. 3 words. Words I had, at some point in the worst weeks after the breakup, wanted more than almost anything. Now, hearing them, I felt nothing dramatic. No surge. No relief. No collapse. No satisfaction. Just quiet. Like a door that had been carefully, completely, finally closed. Claire, I said. I know, she said quickly. I know. I just wanted you to know. I appreciate you saying it. Is that all? What else would you want me to say? She looked at the floor, then back up. I thought I'd see you struggling, she said. She said it quietly, like she hadn't meant to say it exactly that way. But she had, and now it was out there. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I had loved deeply. This woman I had spent 3 years adjusting myself around. This woman who had told me, with total confidence, that I would never move on without her. And I saw it clearly for the first time. She wasn't talking about me, that morning in the kitchen. She was talking about herself. The terror underneath that sentence had never been about my ability to survive. It had been about hers. She was the one who needed to be needed. She was the one who felt most like herself when someone was tethered to her. She was the one who couldn't quite picture a version of her life where she wasn't the center of someone else's. And now she was standing 20 feet from the proof that she was wrong about me. And she hadn't expected it. And it had shaken her. I didn't struggle the way you thought I would, I said. She looked at me. No, she said. You didn't. I'm sorry, that's hard to see. You don't have to apologize for it. I know. Another silence. I should go back to my friends, she said. Yeah. Take care of yourself, Claire. She gave me her new number before she left. Told me to reach out if I wanted to talk. I put it in my phone. I didn't promise anything. She knew. A week later, a text. Long this time. Clearly drafted. She said she'd been in therapy. That she'd done a lot of thinking. That she understood now, really understood, what had gone wrong. That she'd been unfair to me. That she'd been carrying things she hadn't known how to name, and she'd been putting the weight of them on me. That she thought she'd found a way, if I was open, to be different. That she wanted the chance to show it. I read the whole thing twice. Set my phone down. Made coffee. Drank most of it standing at the kitchen window, watching the street below. And I thought about everything. The eggshell mornings. The engagement party. The half-marathon week. The app she'd called a hobby phase. The promotion she'd quietly deflated. The coastal road I hadn't been allowed to take on a trip I'd planned entirely for her. And I thought about the other side. The early days. The way she laughed at things she didn't expect to find funny. The way she'd sat with me during the worst weeks of my career. The Sunday mornings before everything got complicated. The way she could make a room warmer just by being genuinely engaged in it. All of it was real. None of it was a fabrication. The love had been real. The good parts had been real. And so had the parts that had slowly, steadily taken something from me without either of us fully naming what was happening. I thought about what saying yes would mean. Not the promise version. Not the text she'd written. The real version. The full picture. The pattern we had been in. The dynamic my therapist had named. The way I had learned to make myself invisible inside our relationship and called it partnership. And I thought about who I had become in the 7 months since she walked out the door. The running. The cooking. The early mornings with coffee and a laptop and something I cared about. The people around me who let me fill up space. The collaborator I'd found through Owen. The 10K finish line. The clean feeling. The laughing. The sleeping. The slow, difficult, real work of reappearing. I thought about whether I wanted to trade that back. Not for a moment. I typed. Slowly. Carefully. I really appreciate this. I can tell you mean it. And I believe you've done real work. I have too. But going back isn't something I want. I genuinely wish you well. Take care of yourself. She read it immediately. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. And then, okay, I understand. A pause. Longer this time. And then, I should have seen you the way you deserve to be seen. I read that sentence 4 times. And I let it sit. And I believed her. And I let that be enough. It's been 7 months since the rooftop. 11 since the Saturday morning in the kitchen. The app is real now. Growing slowly. Honestly, The way things grow when they're built on something solid. I have a collaborator I respect. I have work I look forward to. I have people around me who don't need me to be smaller to feel comfortable next to me. I started seeing someone. Not far along yet, but easy. That particular ease that feels like something being right rather than something being careful. The kind of ease I'd forgotten existed. I ran a full half marathon last month. The one I'd trained for years ago and crossed half broken. This time I slept every night of the training week. I woke up on race morning feeling ready. I crossed that finish line and stood in the crowd, breathing hard, looking at the number on my chest, and felt something that I don't have a better word for than whole. Just whole. My therapist asked me recently what I wanted my life to look like in 5 years. In the past, that question would have locked something in my chest. I would have immediately started calculating what the correct answer was. What version of my future was acceptable? What I wanted that was also small enough not to disturb anyone. This time, I answered before she finished the sentence. Clear. Full. Mine. And she smiled. And I understood why. Here is what I want to say about Claire. Not as a villain. Not as someone who intended any of this. Just as a person who had fears and wounds and needs she didn't have language for. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't calculating. She was someone who needed to feel essential. Who had found, in me, someone pliable enough and loving enough and conflict-averse enough that it had worked for a while. Until it stopped working. Until I started disappearing faster than she could account for. And when it ended, when she stood in our kitchen on a gray Saturday morning and looked at me across the table, she said the thing that scared her most. She framed her own fear as my limitation. She said, "You will never move on without me." And she meant, I am not sure I know how to exist without someone who needs me. I was never the dependent one. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. She was. And I think, sitting here now, looking back with the distance that time provides, I think she's starting to understand that. The text she sent. I should have seen you the way you deserve to be seen. I believe that was real. Not strategy. Not a final move in a game. Just someone, in a quiet moment of honesty, saying a true thing. And I hope she does the same work. I hope she finds the same stillness. I hope she figures out who she is when she isn't at the center of someone else's need. Because that version of her, the one who sat with me during the worst weeks of my career, genuinely present, genuinely steady, that version deserved to exist without conditions. Not just when I was falling apart. Not just when being needed made her feel enough. All the time. She deserved to feel enough all the time. So do I. So does everyone. That's the thing nobody tells you about the relationships that diminish you slowly. They don't end with a villain. They end with two people who deserved better, from each other and from themselves. And sometimes the most honest, most loving, most complete thing you can do is close the door gently and walk toward the person you've been becoming on the other side of all that pain. She told me I'd never move on without her. Turns out she was describing herself. And turns out, I was describing someone else entirely.